Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to be looking at the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula is a formula you can use to solve quadratic equations. It tells you if you want to solve a quadratic equation in the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, then the solution to this equation is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. A is your number in front of x squared here, b is your number in front of x, and c is the number by itself. Something I want to note too is you can only use the quadratic formula if your quadratic equation is equal to 0. So, you need to make sure your quadratic equation is equal to 0 before you can use the quadratic formula. If you're interested in where the quadratic formula comes from, I will post a link to a video in the description below that derives the quadratic formula. But in this video, I just want to take a look at some examples of the quadratic formula and how we can use it to solve quadratic equations. Alright, in this example, I want to solve x squared minus 5x plus 1 is equal to 0. To solve this quadratic equation, I can just use my quadratic formula. And remember, my quadratic formula tells us that x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. A, remember, is my number in front of x squared. Here in my equation, my number in front of x squared is just going to be 1. Because x squared, that's the same thing as 1x squared. So, my a value here is 1. My b value is going to be negative 5. Because that's the number in front of x. And my c value here is just going to be 1. Because that's the number by itself. So now, all I have to do is I'm just going to plug these numbers into my quadratic formula and then simplify my expression to get my final answer. So let's do that. Okay. So to start off with, I have negative b. B is negative 5, so that's what I'm going to plug in for b. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. Again, b is just equal to negative 5, so that's what I'm going to plug in for b. I'm going to square that. And now I'm going to subtract 4 times a. Again, remember a is just 1. Times c. Again, c is also equal to 1. And I'm just going to divide all of that by 2 times a. And a, remember, is equal to 1. Now, in my equation, I'm taking the opposite of negative 5. the opposite of negative 5 is positive 5. Inside my square root here, I have a negative 5 squared. Negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. So this will just simplify to give me 25. Now I'm subtracting 4 times 1 times 1. 4 times 1 times 1 is just 4. So I'm just going to be subtracting 4. And then I just want to divide this all by 2 times 1. 2 times 1 is just 2. And I can simplify this even more, right? Because underneath my square root, 25 minus 4 is just equal to 21. And I'm just going to divide this all by 2. And really, there are two solutions here, right? So you'll notice there's a plus or minus here, right? This plus or minus really tells us there are two solutions. There's going to be one solution here that involves adding, and another solution that involves subtracting, right? Because the plus or minus here tells us we're adding or subtracting to find our answer. So, again, there's two solutions. One of them is 5 plus the square root of 21 over 2. And the other one is x is equal to 5 minus the square root of 21 over 2. And there we go. There's my answer. Let's take a look at one more example. 2x squared plus 3x is equal to 1. Again, remember, to use the quadratic formula, you need to make sure your quadratic equation is equal to 0. My quadratic equation here, though, is not equal to 0. It's equal to 1. So I need to rearrange this quadratic equation to make it equal to 0. And how can I do that? Well, I can do that by subtracting 1 here, right? If I take away 1 here, then my quadratic equation is going to be equal to 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take away 1 here from both sides. And if I take away 1 from both sides, then my quadratic equation becomes 2x squared plus 3x minus 1 is equal to, well, 1 minus 1, those cancel out. So this is equal to 0. And now we can just use the quadratic formula to solve this equation, right? Because this quadratic equation is equal to 0. So let's do that, right? Let's use the quadratic formula to find my solutions. My a value, remember, that's my number in front of x squared. So my a value here is 2. My b value is 3, because that's the number in front of x. And my c value is negative 1, because that's the number by itself. So I'm going to plug these three numbers into my quadratic formula to find my answer. So I'm going to take the negative, I'm going to find negative b. B is just 3. So I'm just going to plug in 3 in for b. Again, my b value here is 3. So I'm going to plug in 3 in for b. My a value here is 2, so I'm going to plug in 2 in for a. And my c value is -1, so I'm going to plug in -1 in for c. And I'm just going to divide this all by 2 times a, or 2 times 2. Okay, and now all I have to do is simplify this. So let's simplify this now. So I'm going to get x is equal to -3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared. Okay, that's 3 squared is 9. Minus 4 times 2 times -1. Well, -4 times 2 is just -8. And -8 times -1 gives you +8. And I'm going to divide this all by 2 times 2, which is 4. And I can simplify this even more, because 9 plus 8 inside my square root is just equal to 17. So there you go, there's my answer. And again, I can write this as x is equal to -3 plus the square root of 17 over 4. Or x is equal to -3 minus the square root of 17 over 4. So just to summarize here, what we saw in this video, the quadratic formula is a formula you can use to solve quadratic equations. And you need to make sure your quadratic formula that you want to solve is equal to 0 before you use the quadratic equation or quadratic formula, right? Again, your quadratic equation needs to be equal to 0 before you can use your quadratic formula to solve it.